Welcome, everyone, to DEI Friday. Today is September 29th, 2023. We are excited to kick off a new academic year of DEI Fridays. My name is Anna D'Souza. I am the organizer of these events. We had started DEI Fridays as part of the Marks DEI Committee, but this year we are very grateful to the Office of the Provost for sponsoring these events. Our first event today is on disability justice. We have a wonderful guest with us today. Her name is Lucy Trieshmann. She is a legal fellow at the American Civil Liberties Union. We also have our very own Lily Shmulevich. Close enough. Okay. I'm sorry. Not perfect. Darn it. But we're really trying to get there. But we are welcoming her. She is the interim director of Student Disability Services Office here at Baruch. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. I am very excited to hear about Lucy's experience with and advocating for disability justice. This is a really critical topic, I think, for not just our students and thinking about how the staff and faculty members here can help serve our students, but also for our colleagues, faculty, staff, administrators. We have a very heterogeneous population in many different ways at Baruch, and we always pride ourselves on, racial and ethnic and linguistic diversity. We also have diversity in people's abilities, and many times those can be invisible. And here we want to really highlight thinking about this aspect of our identities through a justice and equity frame. So I would like to invite you right now to take a few moments just to breathe with me, to settle into the space. For many of us, it has been a stressful week not having access to any of our work files because of the malware attack. And so I think all of us need to take a few minutes to breathe. I invite you to keep your cameras on or put them off. This is your space. Really, it's just about grounding ourselves together for a few moments before we start our session. Think about the intentions in both your heart and your mind being here today. We talk about DEI Fridays as bridging the space, both the heart space and the head space. We live a lot up here in academia, and here we want to get the tools and the knowledge that will help us learn and grow and be better in terms of bringing more inclusion and more equity to our campus and beyond. That takes a lot of our heart space as well. And so right now I invite you to close your eyes with me if you feel comfortable, and just take about 30 seconds to breathe. Take some slow, long inhales through your nose, and slower and longer exhales through your mouth. As you breathe in and out, think about setting your intention for today's session, making an effort to focus on being present. And as you allow your breath to go back to its natural rhythm, I invite you to slowly open back up your eyes and to come back to the space. And I'd like to welcome you again to DEI Fridays. For those of you who I do not know yet, I welcome you here. You can feel free to put in the chat your name and where you are at Baruch or at CUNY. Before we begin, I just want to share our website. This is where you are right now for this first DEI Friday. We have 2 more coming up in October and November. I'll drop this in the chat in a moment. And on our website, you can see all of our previous sessions where we have resources and videos as an example here, or sometimes resources and videos. Here's another example. We have recordings and details on our, the past couple of years. Finally, I just want to read our community agreements before we get started. We are a community in progress. We can struggle together. We can grow together. We will practice active listening, respectful language, and kindness. We can ask for literacy moments when there are terms we are not familiar with. We assume positive intent, and we also take responsibility for impact. We value each other's lived experiences and appreciate the vulnerability necessary to share them. We are willing to slow down discussions to facilitate the exploration of complex, nuanced issues. We are prepared for discomfort around these issues. And if any content seems inappropriate or harmful, we'll pause the discussion and may talk to folks separately. Please email, just directly message me if you need any support or anything's coming up for you during our session. Okay, and without any further ado, I would like to welcome Lucy Trieshmann here today. Lucy is a multiply and dynamically disabled speaker, writer, activist, and change maker who advances the principles of the disability justice movement in many ways. Currently, Lucy is a legal fellow at the ACLU in the Disability Rights Program, focusing on the intersection of disability justice, policing, and abolition. Lucy has a BA in Anthropology and Global Development Studies from the University of Virginia and a JD from New York University. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We're really happy to have you here today. So why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit about your journey to your current role as a disability advocate and also a legal fellow at the ACLU within that program.
Sure, I would love to. I became disabled when I was 21 years old. I was born with a genetic condition that I did not know I had. And when I was 21, it more or less caught up with me as I was entering my final year of undergrad at UVA. And it really changed my perception of the world. It was a very tough transition for a lot of reasons. The university I was attending really let me down in some pretty significant ways in the disability services they were providing. My friends let me down in a lot of ways by not knowing how to navigate this new relationship and choosing to remove themselves from it rather than try through it with me. It was hard with my family, this new transition into my new identity. And it was hard for me as, sort of a larger life mission. Like, wow, what am I going to do with my life now? My eyes have been open to all of this injustice that I have also contributed to my entire life up until this point, because I was not educated in disability at all growing up. I had no idea. I occasionally interacted with people with disabilities and my mom would tell me not to stare, and that was pretty much the extent of the conversation, which is, I think, what a lot of us have experienced. And there's not this intentional introduction to what disability community is and how we are a marginalized population like other marginalized groups. So I took on that education myself. I was lucky to have a really fantastic mentor at my university who I'm still friends with today. And I also, my first job out of undergrad, because I realized that the path to a PhD in anthropology was maybe not what I wanted to do anymore. Now that my worldview had changed so significantly, I actually ran her small nonprofit for a couple of years between undergrad and law school while I figured myself out. And it was a disability nonprofit centered on disability and the travel industry. And I got to talk to a lot of really fantastic people with disabilities about their experiences. And through that, they helped shape my perception of myself. And I was really lucky to have her name's Rupa Valdez, to have her as a mentor, because she very early in my disability journey sat me down and was like, you're disabled, right? because obviously I was struggling and did not have a name for what I was struggling with. And she's like, you need to know this because it'll help you and it'll support you and community will hold you and help you through this. And she was right. I very distinctly remember that day and the change that it had on my perception of myself and my outlook on life. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a battle of war between me and my body. This is a social identity. This is a whole community of people who are here to love and support me while I figure this out and get my disability joke, get my feet underneath me again. I use a wheelchair, so it's funny, you can laugh. And it was, she was a really pivotal part of my journey. And so after that, I started educating myself. I started reading a lot. I started talking to a lot of people, engaging in the social media, and gathered this sense of identity around disability that I'm very proud to have today. So I went to law school because I thought that frankly, I was filled with lots of anger and rage at all of these systems that had let me down in such profound ways, and angered more so by the fact that the people in power, in positions where they had power to change this, were not doing it. And so I was like, well, shit, I guess I have to go to law school now. And so then I decided after a couple of years to put in my applications to law school, which had never been on my radar as a possibility before this. My mom didn't go to college. My family does not do professional education. So this was a whole new world for me. And I went to NYU. I moved to New York from Virginia just to go to NYU, and I've stayed ever since. I've loved it. But unfortunately, my experiences at NYU were also really challenging as a disabled person. That university also did not take care of me. And I had to engage in so much advocacy to make sure that I and other disabled students had access to our very basic needs being met. And I most certainly spent more time on advocacy than I did on schoolwork because the systems were structured in such a way to oppress us, frankly. And it did help my advocacy. It made it really challenging to be both a student and an advocate and an activist at the same time, which is not something any student should have to do unless they want to. I did not have a choice. And it was always very frustrating when I would hear folks in admin, particularly people in our student disability services office, be like, wow, it's really great that you're doing this work. Like, it's really admirable of you to do this work. It's not admirable. It's necessary. We have to, because nobody else is going to do it, apparently. And I wanted to, shake her and tell her, this is your job that I'm doing. Don't make me do it anymore. And that was always a really frustrating part of the experience. It's like, I'm not doing anything special. I'm just fighting for my rights. That shouldn't be something that you, as the person who is taking them away from me, should applaud. So then I went through my legal education at NYU. And after that, I obviously went to law school with the intent to do disability rights litigation. And I had some wonderful experiences that affirmed that decision throughout my time at law school in externships and internships. And now I'm at the ACLU's disability rights program and having a really phenomenal fellowship year with them. I'm actually on the job hunt right now and for my next chapter as my fellowship comes to an end. And I'm really excited to continue working in disability rights litigation and continue using the advocacy skills that I have been forced to acquire to continue benefiting my community.
Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate you describing your journey and sharing it with us, but also I think, we don't hear this very often, which is what you just highlighted, which is that so many people have been forced to play certain roles of advocates and to be able to get through, right? And of course it serves others as well as you're doing it, and there's this admiration idea, but the reality is that it's your life, right? It's your life, and you're paying your time and money. I'm an economist, of course, PR, time and money to NYU for the law school, and to be in a place where, as you said, we typically say these institutions, academia, we're not made for most people, but here it's not just not made for, but it's oppressive, right? You literally sometimes in some spaces, especially in New York City, and we'll get into this later, but are unable to engage in what would be very normal life, quote unquote normal, right? Wanting to, you mentioned, the nonprofit with the disability and travel, right? But just traveling around New York City, right? The challenges for so many New Yorkers. So I appreciate that. By the way, I forgot to mention, but we will have a Q&A in a little while after I engage a little bit more with Lucy. So please, if you want to write your questions in the chat or just hold them, we will engage that way as well. So can you speak a little bit to the term in particular and this idea of disability justice, maybe kind of how that term has evolved over time and the way you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of slides that I'm going to share. And a couple that I meant to share with the last part of what I was saying, but I will breeze through those in there we go. I will breeze through those in the interest of time.
You should be able to share. Have you tried it yet?
Yes, this is me struggling with my technology.
All right,
okay,
there we go. I see it. Well, almost. It'll start. Okay, there you go. Go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, so just like very quickly to highlight some numbers. 85% of high school students graduated in 4 years in 2017, and only 67% of disabled students did. So this problem with disability representation in education, higher education and professional school starts at the K through 12 level. 36% of disabled students dropped out. In terms of poverty, 24% of people with disabilities live below the poverty line compared to 11.8% nationally. And for disabled BIPOC, it's 37%. Unemployment rates for disabled folks are also about twice that of non-disabled people. And it's legal to pay disabled people below a minimum wage in most states. So that's usually below like $2.50 an hour. Which if we tried to pay a non-disabled person that, outrage, it would be absolutely outrageous. And then also disabled folks are desperately represented in carceral settings. These numbers that I'm about to share are certainly underestimations because of a number of factors about people being afraid to self-identify because of stigma, about not coming into this identity because they don't know it's a thing that they have access to, a whole host of reasons. But 32% of folks incarcerated in federal and state prisons have at least one disability, and that percentage is about 40% in local jails. Based on my experience working with incarcerated folks, it's certainly over 50% at least of folks in prisons and jails who have disabilities. I'll get to that one in a second. So we get to this discussion of what is disability justice, and I think it's first important to define what is ableism, or discrimination against people with disabilities. This is my favorite definition. It's kind of academic, but y'all are an academic crowd, so I know you're all right with that. But this is by Talila Lewis, T.L. Lewis, who's a really fantastic disabled lawyer and activist. But this definition says that it's a system assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on socially constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. And I really want to highlight this next sentence, that this is all rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. We cannot remove disability from these other spheres of oppression because they are all one and the same. And these systemic oppressions, lead us to value people based on our perception of them. Are you healthy? Are you well? Are you independent? What is independence? a whole host of other examples, but you also don't have to be disabled to experience ableism. And that goes back to this idea that the construction of disability is rooted in other systems of oppression, because oftentimes, we'll assume that systems assume that, say, Black people are less intelligent. That's ableism. We assume that, unhoused people are dirty and have diseases and are gross. That's ableism. So they're all one and the same. And that's an important foundational concept for us to talk about the disability justice movement. So the disability justice movement, and I will compare it to the disability rights movement in a minute so that you understand the difference, but DJ began in 2005 as a response to the deficits of the disability rights movement, which really started in the early 70s, late 60s, as a really when we first came together as an organized community. And that led to the passage of the regulations for Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. So the Rehab Act was 1973, and then the 1990 Disability ADA. And you might be familiar with those through the activism of the recently deceased Judy Heumann, who was a fantastic activist and led a lot of these movements. But that movement was very white. It was very cisgendered. It was very heteronormative. And so in 2005, Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, and Stacey Milburn, through this organization called Sins Invalid, came together to write out principles of disability justice and really birthed the disability justice movement. And it focuses explicitly on intersectionality and transformative radical change, and moves beyond this rights-based framework that we'll talk about in a moment. But the 10 principles of disability justice, which I've given Anna a link to, and she'll provide that later, are intersectionality. That one's self-explanatory. Leadership of those most impacted. Anti-capitalism. And anti-capitalism is one that trips people up a lot. But if you think about the financial marginalization of people with disabilities, it makes sense. The statistic is that we have to spend at least $10,000 more a year just on staying alive and living expenses than non-disabled people do. So capitalism and capitalistic notions of productivity directly harm people with disabilities, both around, can you work? Are you on disability benefits from the government? The perception of people who receive benefits, quote unquote, benefits from the government. So it's all tied into anti-capitalism. Cross-movement solidarity is an explicit value because we know that we will not be free until we are all free. Wholeness, taking in the entirety of a person, the good and the bad, their disabilities, their other identities, and acknowledging that people are complex and allowing them to show up as they are and still be valued. Sustainability, similarly, if we don't have a planet, none of us will be here. Cross-disability solidarity. Historically, the disability movement has been very segregated by type of disability, and we've now come to the realization that that is simply not the path forward. Again, we will not be liberated until we are all liberated. Interdependence, this idea of deconstructing independence as this value that we should all be striving for, when in reality, independence is a myth. Nobody's independent. We all rely on one another in some way. We rely on the government. We rely on our partners, our family members, our friends. Nobody exists outside of their relationships with other people. And so this idea of interdependence is just highlighting what we already know is true and learning to value that. Collective access. So this goes to making sure that everybody can access every part of the movement, of the services we're fighting for. You know, hearing disabilities, mobility disabilities, everything that you can think of, we should all be thinking of at the same time. No form of access is, a single form of access is insufficient if it's not also joined by all of these other forms of access. And it goes to this idea of universal accessibility. And then number 10, collective liberation sort of caps off all of these principles and points to that we are all in this together and we have to act like it. Then briefly, just the differences between the disability rights movement and the disability justice movement. A rights-based framework generally, like we've seen this in other areas as well, like the racial justice movement. Justice is a very explicit choice in saying justice, because justice and rights are different. The disability rights movement is just interested in equal opportunity and rights, whereas the disability justice framework says we have to reimagine these systems. We cannot fix a system that was built on ableism, racism, etc. We have to create a new one that actually centers marginalized voices. There is no fixing what is inherently broken. And that's why disability justice is more proactive. And we talked about how it's exceptional, it's explicitly intersectional, and it disrupts traditional avenues towards change and just challenges us to reimagine our normative frameworks. So the disability justice movement is how I try to live my life. I try to make sure I'm bringing disability justice principles into every single thing I do every day, because I know that it's a framework by which I can live my life, not just one to think conceptually about disability.
Thank you. Thank you for laying that out. And I just want to follow up, and then I'm going to open it up actually to the audience to talk about this first portion, because then I'm going to ask Lucy a bit about kind of what we can do, what we can do at Baruch. We know that, Lucy just described the frame that, to look at the world and what kind of strategies and tools Lucy thinks would be useful for us. So be ready to ask your questions in a moment. I just wanted to ask you, Lucy, about the tension in terms of in being a lawyer, right? And in terms of like recognizing just the limitations, I guess. I don't know if it's a tension per se, but I appreciate how you kind of separated, I mean, these two different movements, but also in particular, recognizing that the rights can only take you so far, right? And I guess this links a little bit to the next portion of our discussion, which is, at the individual level, what can we do to, if we're not going to become lawyers and whatnot. I appreciate, we really appreciate your story. And I think that there are many of us who have been galvanized in different ways to shift our work, even if we haven't, gone to different schools. We've kind of changed. I know that there are a few of you in this room. We did this training a couple of years back called Undoing Racism in Community Organizing. And there are a few of us who grew up in this country and didn't know our history, on purpose. And so that, with respect to racism, has really shifted a lot of our thinking. I can speak for a few people here in the room, because we've had these conversations over time. And so I guess I'd just like you to speak a little bit more to this kind of the limitations, I guess, of the kind of more legal approaches and policies and procedures. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. I mean, there is an argument that the law cannot adopt a disability justice framework because the law itself was created under, ableist and in an ableist society under ableist direction. So this is an ongoing conversation to a certain extent about the role that the law can play in advancing disability justice. And there's a lot of critique on lawyers like myself who say that they do disability justice work. And there's really only so far we can go. The law is imperfect. It will continue to be imperfect. And as of right now, the only document that we really have that guarantees rights for people with disabilities in the United States is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is itself an imperfect document. We also have the Rehabilitation Act, but they pretty much say the same thing. The Rehabilitation Act just also applies the ADA to the federal entities, federally funded entities. And it is actually every Friday, my team and I at the ACLU, I send out a little disability justice education email because we're all working on expanding our understanding and sort of broadening our perception of disability in the law, and how we can also be activists through change within our organizations and within the law itself, while still working within the structures that it provides. And I think one way that I personally try to take an anti-ableist approach to my work is by centering community, because I think it's a responsible part of lawyering regardless. I think that we should be in touch with community if we are trying to bring lawsuits that will change the rights of people in the community or change their access to things. But it really goes beyond that, that the changes that we are asking for should come directly from the community. That bottom-up approach as to a top-down approach, or else we're just perpetuating systems of ableism that say, oh no, we know something that you don't know, and we're making the correct decision on your behalf. So I don't know if that gets at your question.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, I guess it's because at the end of the day, like you said, we're still living in these structures, right? And so one thing that you were describing with the justice aspect was to think about creating new structures, right? New organizations, new ways of being. And, this, there's been talk of this over the pandemic, of course, with like more within the anti-capitalist framework, with thinking about mutual aid and different ways to kind of like, bypass what has been a very traditionally individualistic and, legalistic framework in society. And I think you answered this to the extent that it's kind of like you're doing both, right? It's not either or. And there's the framework that you're still pushing against, and using the law to try to advocate for people's lives and changing the laws. But then at the same time, it's thinking outside of the typical ways of being, right? So thinking more, not just coming from the community, but being in community as well, right? And recognizing the importance of that in a society that historically has focused on individualism, individual rights, and certainly in these areas as well. Thank you for that. So I would like to open the floor up right now to questions for Lucy on this first part. You can just unmute, maybe say your name, and if you prefer to use the chat, please do that.
I would like to ask a question about about equity and access to information and services. So, and first of all, I appreciate the answer that you just gave. I think that mentality of we know what's best for you, and there might be some good laws and policies, but how those get applied, that's something that my family has experienced, in particular my niece, whose daughter has autism and is on public assistance and is from a low-income family, and just the way that they get treated is so much different. And that, we know better than you has been very detrimental. But I also, we're looking at now, looking for my daughter, who is exhibiting all these symptoms of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or possibly ADHD. And the things that we are cited in terms of the whole evaluation process and diagnosis, like $7,500, or if you want to work with a grad student, it's like $6,500. And I'm thinking, like, this can't be right. Is it really, that these services aren't available, and just navigating that process, resources for people. And then for the students, and I'm sure Lily can speak to this later, but students at Baruch have also have said to me, like, I think I have ADHD, but I don't sort of know where to go, where to start. And I'm not sure what to tell them, because I'm not sure if service students, the services that we have in universities are for that portion, the evaluation and diagnosis. It just seems so overwhelming. So I don't know if you have insight on that, or resources for that, for people who are experiencing that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's consistent, unfortunately, across a lot of conditions and diagnoses. There's this huge barrier to testing. And like, I had to wait years to see a geneticist to finally get a diagnosis of what was going on with me. And because the wait lists were obscene. And in that particular case, it was not true that money would get me to the top of the list, but sometimes that is true. And that's also not right. I think it comes down to, well, speaking to like universities' attitudes towards this, frankly, I don't think they see it as their problem whether or not people get tested. It's sort of the student's responsibility to advocate for themselves. Universities don't take a proactive approach to making sure students have access to care, access to appropriate testing. I had to have neuropsychological testing for the bar exam. I had to get a full evaluation, and that is thousands, and that might be the testing you're talking about. It's thousands of dollars. And I had to, thankfully, I was able to find a program that did sliding scale. And I worked with a graduate student, which made it affordable for me. It was still a couple $100s, which was barely affordable. I was on scholarship and paying for everything with loans. So you're right that it's simply an unattainable goal for some folks. And that's wrong and not how it should be. There are some resources available, like the one that I was able to access that was through NYU Steinhardt. They have a sliding scale program where you work with a graduate student, and I had a pleasant experience with them. But it is very much the case that, you know, these universities that purport to take care of us, who say, oh, you know, we're going to take care of your whole self. We come as you are. We will provide what you need. Don't. And it's a messaging problem. It's a problem of the, you know, support in action and not following up on what they promise. But that's part of why I felt so let down by UVA when I got sick. I was like, oh, they've taken care of me so far. It'll be fine. No way. As soon as I was disabled, the whole game changed. So it's consistently true, unfortunately, which I know is not a satisfying answer.
Thank you.
If I could step in at this point. So I echo a lot of what Lucy is saying. Some of our students do not come to our office already diagnosed. You know, we always say disabilities diagnosis can happen at any point during your academic years, but it is true that getting assessed can be very burdensome, time consuming, and expensive. And it's really not fair to put it on these students who are coming from different backgrounds, different financial brackets. CUNY does have a resource packet where we put together a list of testing sites in all the 5 boroughs. But yes, sometimes they do cost thousands of dollars. Then there's also the wait time, you know, to be assessed can take multiple visits. And sometimes they need it now and they won't get the results until a couple months later. And so it is a challenge that we are seeing in our office as well, because not everybody comes with documentation, not everybody comes with money to pay for these assessments, but we do still would say to refer those students to our office to see how we could navigate them getting connected to the resource packet. You know, sometimes we ask students to see if they can call their provider, but yes, the burdensome does rely a lot on the student, but we try to help them navigate which of the resources they can use within the 5 boroughs. And then we have referred students to the counseling center as well, but as Jael said, the wait time can be very long. So what we've tried to do in conjunction with that is try to listen to the student's story, because on top of the documentation, what is their narrative? What are they coming with? You know, what is the interactive process that we're having? And we've given temporary accommodations sometimes while they are getting assessed until we have the full picture. But it is challenging for some students who don't have documentation and are not even sure what they need to be assessed for. Sometimes they just say something doesn't feel right, or I'm taking too long to take exams, or I can't concentrate. So they sometimes don't even know what the root of the situation is and then how to navigate that. So we try to help them as best we can to connect them to the right resources and the right people, but the financial burden sometimes is the reason where they're like, forget it, it's too time consuming, I don't have the money, because they have so many other responsibilities. We have a lot of first generation students who are also working at this time. They're taking 5 classes, maybe they're the main breadwinner. And so to ask them to put that time can be a little discouraging for them. But I would still, if a student comes up to you, just refer them to our office and we can at least meet with them and guide them on the next steps.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Lucy, please.
Go ahead.
I do have a response. Yeah, I think Lily,
Yes.
you're actually making a really great argument for why documentation shouldn't be necessary at all.
Mhm.
I have long queried why we must document our disabilities when in fact it's a lived experience, not a diagnosis. I think that's an important thing that people don't often recognize, is that your disability is not diagnosable, it's a social condition. And so a student disability services office should be supporting students where they are. And if they have documentation, great, sure. But if that's helpful for them in certain avenues, that's wonderful. But I don't know why a doctor has to give some stamp of approval on a condition someone is already living with and can already, articulate, I'm having trouble with this, and I think some extra time would help.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of trainings and workshops that we've gone to that has moved away from the documentation piece. I mean, there's even some colleges don't even take documentation. They'll just meet with the student and then listen to their narrative. Does it help in some cases? Yes. Majority of our students have invisible disabilities, like 90% of our students. So professors can have students, they wouldn't even know what is going on with them. And sometimes what we struggle with is the pushback from faculty, like they want proof. And so that is definitely not appropriate to ask, especially if we verify that the student is part of our office. But that also affects the student because it's making them prove something that they physically or can't prove. And then they have to, they come to our office and they're very distraught. And they're like, why are these professors asking for documentation? So I think we have to be very aware of how we navigate this and make sure that we're listening to the student's story and that it's more from a universal perspective. I really try to emphasize that a student registered with our office is not just our student, it's the whole college's student. We all have a responsibility in ensuring the student's success. So, if I hear somebody say like, well, they're part of your office, you figure it out. That's not fair to us and the student, because we all have to work together to ensure the student's success. And particularly after COVID and coming back to more in person, students are struggling with a lot more than we may know. And so it's important. That's why we really try, I say now that accommodations are not black and white anymore. We really have to look at what is the student's narrative, what is their story, and where are they being impacted. And then, with the fine line, again, like you said, it's not a perfect ADA system, is how do we still accommodate the student, ensuring that the academic integrity is not affected, and so that we're all on the same page. But it's really, we're trying to navigate what is the student's story and what are their limitations.
I think, Lucy, I'd love for you to speak to this a little bit, this point again, that we were talking about creating different institutions, right? Because I feel like what I'm hearing a bit in this discussion is that, we are still, I think a lot of what's holding people back is the pushback, as you mentioned, from faculty, and also like the whole legal system. So it's not just, right? It's like pushback from other students who hear that these other students have time and maybe their parents get involved. Who, I feel like in the US, I don't know if you know, but I think per capita, we have more lawyers than any country in the world, except I think Israel, and that may be because of the tech sector. Anyway, but we have a lot of lawyers ready to sue for lots of reasons. And I think that what is challenging here is working within the system that we currently have. I mean, Lucy's proposing something, and others I know proposing something different, which would be not needing that documentation, right? The other thing that you mentioned, Lily, is more broadly thinking about how all of our students are our student success is our responsibility. That's part of this new strategic plan. They've, that's one of actually the bullets in one of the I guess the first column of our strategic plan is that student success is everyone's responsibility. And the question is, as faculty, and maybe someone here can speak to the staff side, for, and broader kind of staff side. But as faculty, I think that one of the biggest challenges, and Hamad mentioned this in the chat, is pedagogical training around these different areas. It's not just universal design for learning, but it's a kind of a more openness to the recognition that there are diversity of abilities and as Lily mentioned, their experiences also with the pandemic and whatnot. And Lucy gave us those statistics that show the intersectionality, right? You've got poverty and you've got a disability and you've got these different levels. And so I guess my question, this kind of brings us to this idea of what can we do, and Lucy, I'd love to hear. So you mentioned that as an example of maybe something Baruch could think about exploring. Lily, I don't know if what our office thinks about this, but I'm just kind of curious, Lucy, if you can share some other ideas, either at the structural level or the individual level, that you think we could start thinking about and having conversations about.
Sure. Yeah, I think at the university level, this idea of one word that has stuck with me is academic integrity. And I think that speaks to a larger perception of disability within the university as something that comes with perks, as something that people would be inclined to lie about. I personally have not been anybody who lies about having a disability to get extra time on an assignment. Have not encountered anybody in that situation, which I know I've not been in every university everywhere. I'm sure it happens on occasion, but cheating happens as well. Lying happens as well. It's just sort of a separate problem from this idea of disability to me. And so I don't think concerns over academic integrity should intersect with ensuring that disabled students have appropriate access to the education that they're being provided. And even more so, because if they need accommodations for the education they're being provided, then the education they're being provided is not universally accessible. And frankly, accommodations shouldn't be necessary. A classroom should be accessible. A syllabus should be accessible. The format of the class should be accessible. So accommodations should only come in extenuating circumstances. Like the fact that I need an accommodation at work to have a special desk that my wheelchair fits under because all the other ones are too low. Ridiculous. I can't use any of the conference room tables because they're too low. That shouldn't be an accommodation. That somebody should have thought of that already. Automatic door opener. Like, we can talk about a lot of structural things that should just be in existence. But if you want to talk about lesson plans and stuff like that, it's why are timed assignments necessary? Does there need to be a time limit on this assignment? And can you justify that as a specific learning outcome, that it has to be completed within a specific time period? Does it have to be completed in classroom, or can it be a take home? What are your fears over it being a take home? Can you structure it in a way that makes it okay for it to be a take home according to, whatever academic integrity standards you want to uphold? I think, there's just a lot of, it's so embedded in everything that we do, especially in education, when we have this perception of competition and everyone's competing against one another. It gets really challenging. But I think at an individual level, things that folks can do to be better allies is to believe people when they tell you things. Invisible disability or not, you don't have to see it for it to be real. You wouldn't require proof of anyone's queerness to believe that believe them when they say they're queer. I think I can share, actually, I have a slide on language, if that would be helpful. Language? Okay, we can do language real quick.
That would be great, thank you.
Okay, get my screens together again. I think that changing our language is a really great way to start changing our mindset, because the way we talk about things reflects how we think about them. So just some like quick, easy tips. Identity first versus person first language. So person with a disability is person first, disabled person is identity first. I use identity first because I think it's important. We call a spade a spade. I am disabled, whether or not people are comfortable with that. I don't care if somebody calls me a person with a disability either is fine. But people have a preference a lot of the time. And so you just follow the person's lead. And I think for non-disabled people right now in this political moment, defaulting to person first is probably safest. But it's becoming less of a tenuous thing. I think there's a lot more interchangeability between the terms now. I think words to avoid, y'all probably pretty familiar with those. However, I would just note one that people still use quite often is handicap. Parking is not handicapped. Entrances are not handicapped. Nothing is handicapped except your golf score. People are not handicapped. It's very offensive. I consider it a slur because it's the year 2023 and I don't deserve to be called that. I have in fact been called that as a slur previously by someone on the street in the city, calling me a handicapped bitch. So people do know the weight of things when they use it. And if they're choosing to use that word as an insult, then you know you shouldn't use it in everyday language. So an appropriate alternative is to say, this is an accessible entrance. This is accessible parking, the accessible whatever. And in a universally designed world, we wouldn't need to use the qualifier accessible. However, I digress. And then things like differently abled, any euphemism like that is disrespectful to the community and our sense of identity. Differing abilities, like I don't really use the term abilities. It's just disabled and non-disabled people because it's not really about our abilities. It's about how people perceive us. So that's another one. So nothing like differently abled. Special needs, I know, is a common one, but we don't use special needs in the disability justice community because our needs are not special. And if they're being perceived as needs, it's because we are in a system, in a place that's not accustomed to us and is not equipped to help us. We don't need to do asking questions, but also just quickly keeping in mind the language that we use. Were you blind to something or were you just not aware of it? Was something crippling, which is, that one gets me because I'm of the impression that the word cripple should never come out of a non-disabled person's mouth. Cripple is one that has been reclaimed by the community in a lot of ways. Like I will refer to myself as a cripple, much like slut for the women's empowerment movement and things like that. However, is it devastating? Is it catastrophic? Is it incapacitating? Something like that. Just be more specific about what you're trying to say. And then to also call something insane or crazy. Those are terms that have been used as terms of violence against people with mental health disabilities. And so it's important to start removing those from our everyday language to the extent we can. And we can have discussions about, dual meaning words and how in one context it means this and another it means that. But we live in a society where those words hold power and we can't ignore that. Even if you intend for it to mean something, it doesn't matter. It'll be taken at however the person receiving it takes it. And that could be in a way that does harm to people with mental health disabilities. So just some quick.
No, that was fantastic. And actually, this is the first time that I've seen that last slide was very useful because I think I've been in conversations where people will say, well, I mean, people will say something to, like a blind spot or a blind, the examples you gave. And it's as if in that moment there's, well, I don't know what other words to use, for that. And so I feel like I will use that particular slide, I think, and keep it, as you said, because it's really like the bare minimum we can do is update our language. I mean, we're talking about like at the, anyway. So before we go, I know many of you have had to go already and it's already 1 o'clock. I just want to I'm going to give the floor to Lily for just a few minutes. If you want to just kind of close out with, you've also mentioned, kind of some of the process for us to connect students with your office, but I wanted to, first of all, thank both of you, Lucy and Lily, but Lucy, particularly because you're from outside of Baruch and CUNY. So you're our guest today, and we're really grateful. I think you may have seen in the chat, people were really appreciative of this conversation. I mentioned this is a critical issue at Baruch, and I say it's critical because it's often invisible, right? So there are many critical issues that we know of at Baruch, and we were actually, and I think I told you the story already, Lily, Lucy, that at the strategic plan launch that happened a few weeks ago, we were sitting at different tables, and the provost had us sit with the plans and talk through what we liked about them and also maybe what was missing. And our table, that was the first thing that someone brought up. And she herself is a person with disabilities. That's how she called herself. And it was very obvious to her. And as you were saying, thinking about framing this from the community up, what are the needs that are not being met right here, and being able to emphasize that was really, I think, powerful in that space that we had. And then having this session today and having it be attended by whoever could come, we so appreciate. I know it's been a rough week for many of you, so we appreciate you who are here. We appreciate those of you who are watching this afterwards, because this is something that we need to bring more attention to at Baruch. And so, yeah, so I'm going to let Lily say a few words, and then we're going to close out. Lily?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize too about digital accessibility. That's been a big thing that's been coming out, especially from the pandemic and even now with remote classes or online. So we always have to think that whatever platform we're going to be using, that it has to be accessible, especially with third-party vendors. And it's, I put some links I think I sent to you, Anna, and we have it on our website, is how to make content accessible, whether it's flyers, announcements, posting on the website, YouTube, any outside platform or any content that you're creating for your class, videos, they have to be accessible. We have 2 assistive technology specialists in our office. So if there's any questions, or if you want to just make sure that it's accessible, please reach out to us and we can let you know. But it has been an issue in the past where content was not accessible, and we do have students who are visually impaired, blind, deaf, hard of hearing, or other impairments, and they're taking classes where it could impact them. And then it's our responsibility to ensure that they have access to the classroom, especially math, lab, and everything. So also, if you're having events, it's very important to put a blurb about accessibility and if you need accommodations. That has also been some challenges that we faced. So if there's any questions, confusion, or you just want to double check, we are open for consultations as well. So just make sure to email us, because I know with the constant changes, sometimes CUNY purchases things, and we just want to make sure that whatever we're going to implement, that it's accessible for all of us. I mean, we definitely heard during when we went remote and everything was on Blackboard recorded, how it helped everybody. And so that's kind of how we want to think. That's how we also want to think, how do we make everything accessible to everybody? Because it's to help, all our students and even staff and faculty, so if student brings up anything, just refer them to our office. Our website is there. And we're also trying to make sure that we update the information as they come, because as Lucy mentioned too, the laws are changing, the situations are changing, students' experience are changing. So we have to meet the student where they are to ensure that they have a successful academic experience.
Thank you, Lily. And thank you again, Lily, for sharing that information and doing what you do for our students through your office and through for faculty and staff as well. I think the example you just gave, I want to start by saying I don't think I've put that announcement on programs that I've had, so that's a really good example of noting on events and programs that if someone needs special accommodate or any accommodations, not special, I'm sorry, accommodations, right? Because they're not special. That's your point, Lucy. So look how much we're learning. I have to process all the things that you've both shared today. Yeah, Lucy, I think just to say, when Lucy and I chatted a few weeks ago, I explained kind of one of the reasons I'm doing this session. I chose to do this session and have chosen in the past 2 years to have sessions around disabilities as well as examples like neurodiversity. And it's selfishly because I have a lot to learn in this area. I definitely have come out of the system of ableism and recognize that there is a lot of work to do. And that's individual work that I need to do to know how I can change my own classes, my own behavior, but also then how we can push for change at Baruch and more broadly at CUNY. So I really appreciate you being here, Lucy, and helping us learn how to help ourselves in this area, listen to the voices, as you mentioned, of people in the community, but also do our own hard work, which is, you don't have to tell us everything. We can read some books. I know you've shared a number of resources with us. I will put those all on the website. Yeah, I really appreciate your time. So thank you again for being here with us, Lucy. We wish you well on the job hunt after this fellowship. And we look forward to seeing what you do in the future and how you're shaking up the world. So thank you again for being here with us.
Well,
Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Appreciate you. All right, let
Lucy.
me just close out the recording. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope to see you at the next DEI Friday.
Right. Thank you.